Freshman year had been everything I'd expected and more. I was far from home, staying in a dorm with a roommate I barely knew, in a building that was a mix of old and new. The place had that familiar scent of stale air, the buzz of the fluorescent. Lights never quite stopped, and the sound of the heating system constantly clicking, as if it were struggling to keep up. But there was one thing that set my dorm apart from others. The old mirror in the bathroom. It was just a regular mirror, old and slightly cloudy at the edges, but there was something off about it. Every time I looked into it, I felt like something wasn't right, like the reflection wasn't completely mine. I'd chalked it up to being tired or adjusting to my new environment, but after a while it began to haunt me. One night, I was in the bathroom getting ready for bed. My roommate Sarah was already asleep, and the halls were silent. As I brushed my teeth, I caught a glimpse of the mirror from the corner of my eye. I didn't know why, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me through it. I turned to look, and for a split second I saw someone standing just behind me in the reflection. It wasn't Sarah. It wasn't anyone I recognized. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I spun around, but no one was there. I turned back to the mirror, and the figure was gone. I told myself I was just imagining things, that I was tired, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It lingered like a shadow. The next few days, it happened again and again. I would catch glimpses of someone in the mirror just standing there staring. But when I turned around, the bathroom was always empty. I began to avoid looking into the mirror, but there were times when it felt like it was calling to me, drawing me in. It wasn't just my reflection that was changing. One night, I looked into the mirror and my reflection didn't match my movements. I lifted my hand and the reflection held it up a second later, as if it were a step behind. I blinked, and it blinked too, but with an unsettling delay. That's when I realized it wasn't just a mirror. It was something else. Terrified, I went to Sarah the next day and told her what had been happening. At first, she laughed it off, thinking I was just stressed out. But that night, she experienced it too. We were both in the bathroom getting ready to leave for a party when Sarah paused in front of the mirror. I watched as her eyes widened in fear. It's not me," she whispered, her voice trembling. I turned to look, and for the first time I saw it too. A dark figure standing behind her in the mirror, tall and shadowed, its face twisted in a grimacing smile. It wasn't Sarah's reflection anymore. It was something else. Something wrong. We ran out of the bathroom, heart racing, but the feeling of being watched didn't stop. We never went back to that bathroom after that night. I don't know if the mirror is still there or if the figure is still waiting, but I know one thing. Something in that dorm wasn't normal. It wasn't just old walls and tired floors. It was something else, something that used the mirror to draw in its next victim. I never believed in ghosts. I was a pragmatic person, and I always laughed off the supernatural as just stories, old legends, and overactive imaginations. But that all changed the night of the storm. It was late October, and a severe thunderstorm had rolled into our college town. The power went out across campus, and the campus housing was plunged into eerie darkness. I was staying in an off-campus house with a couple of roommates, and we'd planned to spend the night playing board games and eating junk food while waiting for the storm to pass. But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The storm raged outside, the wind howling, rain pouring in sheets, but there was something else, a feeling that we weren't alone. Around midnight, as the wind slammed against the windows, I heard a faint knock at the door. I froze. My roommates didn't seem to notice, too absorbed in their game. But the knock came again, louder this time. My heart raced, and I got up to answer the door, wondering if it was one of the neighbors seeking shelter from the storm. I opened the door, and there stood a tall man, drenched to the bone from the rain. His clothes were soaked, and his eyes were wide, almost frantic. He was breathing heavily, like he'd been running for a long time. "I'm lost," he said, his voice low and rough. "Can I come in?" I didn't recognize him, but that wasn't unusual. The area around our house had a lot of students who frequently moved in and out, so I didn't think much of it at first. "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "You Can dry off here until the storm clears up." He smiled faintly as he walked in, his eyes scanning the room like he was looking for something. But there was something strange about his gaze. It didn't seem to focus on anything, not really. His eyes flickered from one spot to another without ever truly settling. It was unsettling. He didn't introduce himself. He just sat down at the table where my roommates were playing cards. For a moment, it seemed like he was trying to join in, but then he just stared at the cards, not saying a word. His silence was unnerving. I didn't know how long he'd been there before I noticed something truly off. As I stood in the kitchen, pouring myself a drink, I glanced back toward the table. He was still sitting there, but something was wrong. His posture was rigid, too still, almost like a mannequin. Then I noticed it. The man was no longer breathing. His chest wasn't rising or falling, and his eyes were now fixed on me, unblinking. My blood ran cold. I turned to my roommates, but they were still talking and laughing, oblivious to what was happening. I felt like I was losing my mind. Suddenly the man spoke, his voice sending a chill down my spine. "Leave. It's not safe here." I didn't know how to react. My feet were frozen to the floor and I couldn't speak. I had to get out. I had to do something. Before I could move, the door slammed shut and the lights flickered. The room became so cold I could see my breath in the air. I turned back toward the table, but the man was gone. Not a trace of him remained. "Did you guys see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. They looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" one of my roommates asked, laughing. "There's no one here but us, but I knew what I had seen. I wasn't sure if the man had been a ghost or something else entirely. But whatever he was, I knew he hadn't been human." The storm passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still with me. Something that had watched me through the darkness, and I never felt truly alone in that house again. When I moved into the university's oldest dormitory, I didn't think much of the rumors that swirled around the place. It was one of the oldest buildings on campus, and like many old buildings, it came with its fair share of ghost stories. Some said the dorm had been built on the site of a former mansion, while others swore that a student had died there years ago under mysterious circumstances. But I wasn't the superstitious type. I'd heard all the stories, but I wasn't afraid. I figured it was just students trying to scare each other. So when I was assigned to room 303, I didn't think twice. The room was small, cozy even, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that overlooked the campus. Nothing particularly ominous about it, but as the weeks went on, something strange started to happen. I'd be lying in bed late at night, reading or scrolling through my phone, when I'd hear strange noises coming from the walls. At first I thought it was the pipes or the creaky old structure settling. But it wasn't the kind of sound a building makes when it's just aging. It was more like footsteps, light but deliberate, moving through the walls. Sometimes I'd hear whispers too, faint voices that I couldn't quite make out. It wasn't long before I realized that the noises weren't confined to just my room. They seemed to come from down the hall, particularly from the door at the very end of the corridor. The door to room 301, it was always locked. Everyone knew that. No one had ever been assigned to it, and it remained sealed as if it had been forgotten by the administration. But the door was there, always at the end of the hall, its brass handle shining in the dim hallway light. One night, after a particularly unsettling experience, I had woken up to the sounds of someone whispering my name. I decided to investigate. I had to know if there was something behind the door in room 301, something that was causing all the disturbances. I waited until after midnight, when the dormitory was silent and the halls empty. The storm outside was fierce, the wind howling, but I didn't mind. I crept out of my room and walked down the corridor, every footstep echoing in the quiet. When I reached the door to room 301, my heart started to race. I knew I shouldn't open it, but curiosity got the better of me. The door was cold to the touch, the brass handle smooth and worn. I turned it, and to my surprise the door opened with ease, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the room was dark, but I could make out the outline of old furniture, a desk, a chair, a bed, but everything was covered in a thick layer of dust. The air inside was thick, musty, as if the room hadn't been touched in years. I took a cautious step inside, my flashlight barely cutting through the dark. There was something unsettling about the room, something off about the stillness. And then I saw it. On the far wall there was a large mirror. It was framed in dark wood, ornate but cracked in places. And in the reflection I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there, a shadowy, indistinct shape, standing just behind me. Its outline was blurry, as if it were made of smoke or fog. I could see nothing of its face, only the vague sense that it was watching me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My breath caught in my throat as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. I felt a chill run through me, like icy fingers, brushing against my skin. And then the whispering began. It was faint at first, like a breeze carrying a message too soft to hear, but it quickly grew louder, more urgent. The words were distorted, garbled, but I could make out a few words. Leave, before it's too late, before it comes back. I backed away from the mirror, panic rising in my chest. The room seemed to close in around me, the shadows deepening. I turned to leave, but as I reached the door, it slammed shut in my face. I screamed, pulling at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I turned back to the room, my eyes frantic, searching for an escape. That's when I saw it. The shadow in the mirror was moving. It wasn't just standing there anymore, it was stepping forward, its dark form shifting and swirling like smoke. It had no face, no features, only an emptiness that seemed to consume everything. I felt an overwhelming urge to leave, but I couldn't move. My body was frozen, my mind screaming for me to run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. The figure in the mirror reached out with long, thin hands, its fingers like claws reaching for me. With one final, desperate push, I managed to open the door. I stumbled out of the room and slammed it shut behind me, panting, my heart pounding. In my chest. The whispers faded, but the image of that dark figure in the mirror stayed with me. I never went back to that room, and I never will. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls just right and the dorm is quiet, I can still hear those whispers. And sometimes when I look in the mirror, I can almost swear I see that figure standing behind me.